IPMNation.com.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are thought, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never won the
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, depending on when you're listening to this show. That's how I start the show every time. My name's Dr. John Rich, and you're with me at Dr. John's Neighborhood. I'm excited about our guest for this evening, afternoon, whatever. His name is Richard, and we're going to be talking about the Black Panther movie. I just saw that about a week ago, and it's pretty phenomenal, and it's creating a lot of waves, and I think rightly so. And he's African American. We're going to be talking about the portrayals of African Americans in cinema and why Black Panther seems to be a pretty stark departure from it. But for the first part of the show, I thought that I would talk with you about an issue that I discuss with my students all the time. I've written about it before as well. And I think that it has some real broad use for everybody in their day-to-day life. So the area that I want to talk about is a special theory, and it's called attribution theory. So attribution theory is basically trying to make predictions about the kinds of behaviors we can expect from people based upon how they attribute their success or failure. So the key question for attribution theorists is, to what or whom do we attribute success or failure? So I want you to imagine people from various areas of life, pairs. We're going to talk about pairs. We're going to have a couple examples where we talk about somebody who has a high level of self-esteem in a certain area, and also a person with a low level of self-esteem in that same area, and how the attributions that they use to explain why they might be successful or why they might fail can often not only dictate the kinds of behaviors that we would see, but also heavily influence the outcomes. So what I'd like to start with is just making the point that when people talk about self-esteem, they seem to be under the impression that people either have high self-esteem or low self-esteem. But in fact, self-esteem is something that affects various domains in our lives, and so you can have high self-esteem in one area and low self-esteem in another area. So let's just imagine two men. These are heterosexual men, and these two men are both interested in asking a woman out on a date. The one man is an attractive man, and he knows that he's attractive, and he feels like he's an attractive person. He doesn't have any trouble with his own ideas about his attractiveness level. I'm in the middle of binge watching the 80s sitcom Cheers these days, and Sam Malone comes to mind. Sam Malone is purportedly a good-looking guy, and he knows it. He knows that he's good-looking. He feels he has high self-esteem when it comes to women, or at least the kind of women that he goes after. And then on the other end, you might have somebody like Cliff Clavin, who, he's not ugly. I wouldn't call him necessarily attractive, but, he's not ugly, and I'm sure he would be able to find dates. As I've heard people say, there's a lid for every pot. So we're going to posit Cliff Clavin as the other side of the dyad, he's a person who doesn't feel very good about his attractiveness. So these two men are both interested in asking the same woman out on a date. These two guys have two options at their disposal. The one is that they can go after her and they can just be confident and ask her out on the date. The other option that they can do is to avoid the situation, or maybe approach the woman in a way that is not wholeheartedly trying to convince her that she should say yes. And so it's about attributions here. So we want to imagine that Sam, the guy with the high self-esteem in terms of his attractiveness, and Cliff, the guy with the low attractiveness self-esteem, are both going about asking this woman on a date with two entirely different mindsets. So let's say that for both of them, they go up to her and she says yes. So the outcome that Sam has and Cliff has is that they were successful. Sam is likely to attribute the success of asking that woman out as a further confirmation of his attractiveness. Whereas Cliff, to be honest, he might be willing to do that, but there's also going to be a part of him that feels like he got lucky, he caught her on a good day, she doesn't know what she's doing, he better take advantage of the date and enjoy it while it lasts, because one day she's going to open her eyes and take a look at him and say, "Oh, hell no." He's waiting for the other shoe to drop. He's expecting for it not to work out. So keep in mind that they both were successful, right? Sam and Cliff were both successful in getting this woman to say yes and to go out on the date with them. But Sam is attributing the cause of his success to himself, and Cliff is attributing the cause of his success to other external factors, like luck or her blindness or her good mood, things that are outside of his control. Let's look at the other side of the coin. They both ask this woman out, and she turns both of them down. What attributions are these two men likely to make? Well, Sam is likely to be able to brush it off fairly easily. I mean, we're not talking about a woman and he's been pining for her for the past year or two, and he's, desperately in love and he's finally expressing himself. This is just a woman that he's met and he wants to ask her out on a date. She says no. He's probably going to attribute that to she doesn't know what she's talking about, or there are the other fish in the sea. He doesn't really let it get to him internally. He doesn't say to himself, wow, maybe I'm not attractive after all. Maybe I'm not that interesting to women after all. I should change my opinion about myself. He's likely to attribute the reasons that she said no to things that are outside of himself. So you hear the reversal, right? When the woman said yes, Cliff attributed his success to external factors. When the woman said no, Sam attributed his failure to external factors. And so you can guess what Cliff is going to do. Cliff is probably going to attribute the reasons that this woman turned him down to, all of the thoughts that he's ever had about himself. He's going to say, yeah, see, I shouldn't have even bothered, because now, here it is. Here's evidence, more evidence that I'm not attractive. No woman's ever going to love me. He's internalizing. He's got an internal attribution. So that is the difference in how the person is going to go about thinking about the reasons for the outcomes that they received. But what we didn't talk about is also how are they going to approach this woman. You can imagine that Sam is going to approach this woman confidently, and he's going to give her his best line. He's going to look her in the eye. He's probably going to dress on the nicer side when he finally goes up to her. Is he going to be nervous? Yeah, he's probably going to have some nerves about it. I mean, anybody who makes themselves vulnerable in a situation like that is going to feel nervous. But he's going to be able to gather himself together and really put his best foot forward. What's Cliff likely to do? Well, it's funny, in an episode of Cheers that I just watched, Cliff had this woman who was sitting near him and he wanted to go ask her out, and he couldn't even put any words together. He was just saying like, he's so riddled with anxiety that he's not even able to form comprehensible words. So the anxiety that Cliff feels is likely to affect his performance. And there's also an interesting part of attribution theory for the person with the low self-esteem that I'd like to share, and that is that there's going to be a part of Cliff that is likely to approach the woman in a half-assed manner. Now, why would he do that? He's worried about this woman saying yes to him. Why wouldn't he do everything that he could to try to make the endeavor successful? Well, because he doesn't expect the endeavor to be successful. His opinion about himself is so low that he's assuming that it's going to turn out exactly the way you might predict. And so it's actually better and more protective of his self-esteem to not try very hard, because if I don't try hard and then she says no, he's able to tell himself that he didn't really care, I didn't really want her to go out with me anyway, she's probably a bitch or something like that. He's able to brush off the failure and not take it to heart. But if he dresses up and he practices in the mirror what he's going to say, he's like watching Sam when he goes and talks to women and he tries to mimic how he behaves, and then she still says no, that's going to hurt. So it doesn't, no matter what happens when Sam goes up to the woman, it doesn't even matter. If she says yes, great. Told you. If she says no, he has a way out. But for Cliff, if she says no, that can be just a devastating, like, straw that broke the camel's back experience. So what's also interesting about that is that the likelihood that Cliff is going to approach that situation in a half-assed manner so that he can protect himself if things don't go well is actually part of the reason that the woman might not say yes. Do you understand that? I want to make sure you understand that. We all go around with these opinions about ourselves, this inner voice that we have about certain areas of ourselves where we feel anxious or we feel lesser. And then when we go into situations where our worst opinions about ourselves might be confirmed, we have a proclivity to go into those situations without putting our best foot forward so that we have an easy excuse for why it might fail. And the fact that we go into it with a half-assed attitude and not putting our best foot forward may be the very reason that we end up with a bad outcome. So you've heard of people talking about, a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's not really a very precise psychological term, but that's the same idea. That you have an opinion that something's not going to work out, and then you do something to protect your self-esteem by not giving it your all, and then it doesn't work out because you didn't give it your all. You see, the reason that Sam might get the date and Cliff doesn't get the date might not have anything to do with their physical attractiveness. It might have to do with the fact that Sam is approaching the woman in a confident manner. He looks nice. He's all tight. He's got his hair cut. He's wearing nice clothes. He's speaking clearly. He's loose and less anxious, so he can laugh at her jokes, and he can tell jokes, and he can make little movements, body language, facial expressions to express his interest. Whereas Cliff is likely to mumble, to act like he doesn't care, or to act really nervous. He's not going to come across as the kind of person that most women are going to want to put their time behind, so to speak. Let's talk about something else. So when I was younger, I would go out with my friends and play ball. I had a certain core group of friends. I had this guy named Chris. I had a guy named Leo. There were a couple other people. There was Mark. And we would go out and we would play wiffle ball. We'd play softball. We'd play football. We'd throw the frisbee. And quite honestly, when we were out there playing those games, I did quite fine. And what was interesting, of course, I never really reflected on this at the time, but especially in middle school, when I got to middle school, there were a couple kids in gym classes in my grade who would ridicule me for one reason or another. I was poor, we didn't have the right clothes. In fact, there was one time where my grandfather bought me some new jeans. Everybody was wearing the certain kind of jean. And so I was convinced that what I needed to do to get people off my back was to have a pair of these jeans. So my grandfather went out and bought me a pair of the jeans for Christmas. I went to school after the Christmas break wearing the jeans. I walked into the school. I was thinking, all right, the time for bullying and ridicule is over. I got myself the new pair of jeans. And then I walk into the homeroom, and one of these kids who used to always make fun of me brought up the fact that I was wearing girls' jeans. So it's funny now, but at the time I was horrified. I had to go through the rest of the day wearing these girls' jeans. Suffice it to say, it did not improve my reputation. Anyway, you put me in gym class, and we go outside in gym class, and we're playing kickball, and somebody kicks the ball to me. I tensed up because there was this thought going through my head that, well, what if I miss the ball? Then they're going to make fun of me. Or what if they pitch the ball to me and I strike out? Then they're just going to make fun of me. And any of you who have done anything athletic know that as soon as you're feeling tense and anxious and you start to worry that you're going to fail, what ends up happening? You fail. You swing and you miss. You try to catch the ball, but you miss the ball, and your worst fears are realized. Well, why does that happen? Because going into the situation, here comes the kickball. It's flying through the air. It's coming right to me. What's happening? Well, there's a part of my brain that isn't available for the task. There's a part of my brain that is having to fight off the anxiety. And so the rest of my brain that might normally be, that's dedicated to the task, may not be enough to be able to fulfill the task at hand. Put somebody else out there who feels like they have good athletic self-esteem. I remember this one kid named Bob. He would go out there and play baseball, and he would catch these hits like over the shoulder. He'd dive for it. he was catching things all over the place, and I admired that skill, and I wished that I had had it. Well, I imagine that when he's out on the field and the ball is coming to him, he's not thinking, oh shit, I hope I don't drop it. He's just engaged. He's fully engaged in the task at hand. He's just letting his body go to the ball. He's got a muscle memory that's been built up to be able to do what's necessary in order to catch it. And what's going to happen? Let's say that Bob is out on the baseball field. First of all, here comes a heavy hitter. Here comes a student who is known for being able to hit the ball really well. I'm over in right field, which is where they always put me, and he's at shortstop, and I can almost guarantee that while I'm in right field saying to myself, please don't hit it to me, please don't hit it to me, please don't hit it to me, Bob is over there saying, hit it to me, I'll take care of it. So see what's happening? I'm already psyching myself up with anxiety about the possibility that I might drop the ball or mess up. And Bob is fully aware, fully present, ready for the ball to come. Who's more likely to catch it? Of course Bob is more likely to catch it. So what would I do in situations like that? Well, the ball, I might be out in the outfield and I would start talking to somebody on the sideline. Well, why would I start talking to somebody on the sideline? Because then if the ball gets hit to me, well, I wasn't paying attention. See what's happening? I'm trying to protect my self-esteem. If I'm out there and I say to myself, all right, I'm going to concentrate as much as possible so that I can catch the ball. I know that I can do it. When I play with my friends, I'm not like this. Everything's going to be fine. And then the ball gets kicked to me and I drop the ball. Now I have to face the fact that this anxiety I had about being a failure was actually well-founded anxiety. It's going to make me more anxious in the future. So what's easier? It's easier for me to get distracted, or the ball's coming and I go jog over to it and I throw it with hardly any kind of force because I'm not trying, and somebody might criticize me and I can be like, whatever, this game is stupid. I've heard people say that before, right? Anytime somebody goes into something seeming like they care about it, and then when the time comes they are acting in a lackluster fashion, you might have somebody there who is trying to protect their self-esteem from having to attribute failure to internal causes. It's much easier for me to jog over to the ball and throw the ball without any energy, and then when people have something to say, I can be like, whatever, dude. Kickball's dumb. I don't even care about kickball. But I do care about kickball. If I could be like Bob, I would love to be like Bob. Meanwhile, Bob is ready for the ball to come. Let's imagine that the ball is hit sharply straight at Bob, and he reaches out, the ball goes in his glove, and drops out of the glove onto the ground. How likely is Bob going to say, I need to quit playing baseball, I'm no good, I'm a terrible player, I shouldn't bother trying ever again? That's not what he's going to do. Bob is more likely to try to think about, well, why did I drop the ball? To reflect on his mistakes and use those mistakes as information that he can use to get better next time. I'm not doing that over in right field. When I drop the ball, there's no information. I mean, the information is, I suck. I knew I sucked. And then I missed the ball, and see, I told you I sucked. There's no trying to get better next time. There's no motivation for me to do anything except try to avoid situations where I can look foolish again. But Bob is over there thinking to himself, oh, well, I didn't plant my feet properly. or I didn't put the glove out early enough. Who knows what he's thinking? But he's certainly not thinking to himself, I knew I was a failure, and now look at me, I'm a failure. He's thinking that the reason that he missed it is because of some tweaking that he needs to do, and he's highly motivated to reflect on that and to go into future situations where he can catch the ball, trying it differently, playing around with alternatives, practicing, visualizing it, because he feels like it's perfectly within my power to get better. There's a big lesson for all of us here. And that lesson is that, everybody's got an area where they don't feel all that great about themselves. Maybe it's your intelligence. Maybe it's your athletic ability. Maybe it's your physical attractiveness. Maybe it's some other area that I'm not thinking of. Your personality. Who knows what it might be? The lesson here is that whatever that area of your life is, you should try to be courageous and think about situations where you might not be trying your hardest in order to protect yourself from the possibility that you are the person that you fear you are. I'd suggest that whatever this area of your life where you feel badly about yourself, whatever area that is, that comes from a background with your parents, a childhood where your parents or some important caregivers sent you messages that told you that you were no good in that area. And that's been unfairly placed in your brain because those messages were delivered before you had the capacity to be critical of what people were saying, to be rational and self-reflective. But you're not there now. You're certainly old enough to think about those messages and where they came from and to decide whether or not you might want to put your nose to the grindstone and learn how to be better in a certain area, or to practice it more, or to revisit it. If that would help your self-esteem, you can turn the corner. You don't have to try something and then if you fail, interpret it as if the messages were accurate. You can be more like Bob. You can try something, and then if you don't do well at it the first time, then you can think about what you could do to be better at it. And maybe you can become a more comprehensive person who feels better about themselves. I mean, I'm not here to tell you that you can do anything that you put your mind to, at least not at a professional level. But you can certainly be okay at anything that you put your mind to. And, these areas of your life that you've shut off because of the anxiety that you've had about what it means about you that you're not good at it. Those messages are not true. So it's time to start thinking about how you might not put your best foot forward in order to protect yourself, and then make the decision to try a little bit harder. There's always room to improve. All right, so that's attribution theory. I think that's a powerful theory that can guide us to some real good decisions that we can make as we become adults and decide to take responsibility for our own lives and our own futures. When we come back from commercial, we're going to talk with my friend Richard about Black Panther. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This guy is really smart and has a lot of good insights, and I am sure that it will be valuable and insightful. So just hang on until the commercial break is over. I'll talk to you in a second.
10 years ago, the energy market was deregulated. This opened the market to new suppliers. Ambit Energy is one of those suppliers. Go to ipmnation.ambitrabbit.com and see how you can not only get free energy by switching to Ambit, you can also earn travel reward points while lowering your utility bills. Learn more by going to ipmnation.ambitrabbit.com. Start saving today.
ipmnation.com.
And we're back. Thanks for sticking around. I have on the line with me, it's actually a friend of my wife's who is becoming a friend of mine. Actually, I like to talk with him. He's a pretty insightful person, and we're here to talk about Black Panther, as I said before. His name is Richard Gibb. Say hi, Richard.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and your interests? Anything you think might help frame the conversation?
Well, I'm an Android developer. I live in Oakland, California. I also have a law degree, and I've done public interest legal work when I was going to school and a little bit after. In terms of giving back, I serve as a board member of an organization called the Swan Within, which works with teenage women incarcerated who have been removed from human sex trafficking and teaches them ballet and attempts to help them onboard into a life of their choosing as opposed to one dictated by their circumstances.
So can you explain how does ballet, what is the purpose of the ballet? How is that a mechanism for getting them where you would like to help them get?
For my role as a board member is to, of course, raise money and raise awareness and just help strengthen the organization. The founder, Meredith Hopper Houston, I believe that in her personal journey, she found ballet helpful in regaining agency over her own body.
How about that?
In relation to her own experience.
Yeah.
Can't really speak for each individual participant, but I believe that for the participants in the program, I believe that it's a combination of things. Certainly the physical agency, attention to themselves, and also just having a period to focus in on something other than their current circumstance as they are incarcerated. So the opportunity to take their mind and focus in on something other than the reality of where they are at that moment.
Yeah.
Is helpful. I think for all of us, we've been someplace we didn't want to be, and being able to focus on something else it has given us a nice break from, maybe the reality of our circumstance, right?
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that. It sounds a little bit like some of the stuff on mindfulness that people have been talking a lot about. I play tennis, and I know that no matter how bad my day was, when I get on the court, I'm not thinking about any of that. I'm thinking about what's happening right in front of me, and it is nice to get a break from it all.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah.
But again, I don't want to speak for someone else's experience, but I think that certainly, ballet is a very challenging task, whether you're a beginner or an expert. So I imagine that it's along those lines.
Yeah, great. Well, so I'll just take us back about, I think it was 2 weeks ago that my family and I saw Black Panther. Black Panther had been out for a bit, and we had conversations in our home about how we wanted to make sure that we supported the movie financially, because everything that we had read about the movie, it seemed like it really represented something that was pretty rare in cinema. It had a positive message, it had a lot of positive portrayals of African Americans, and we just wanted to be a part of the experience. And it was a fantastic movie. We've had a conversation about your impressions of the movie and the meaningfulness of it, and I wondered if you could just kind of extrapolate on that for a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's significant to start with the fact that Black Panther, it's a comic, but it is a creation. You know, it is not. It is not the retelling of a particular historical event.
Right.
And of course, the wonderful thing about the movie is that when taking the comic story to the screen, the creators drew, of course, from the story as it was written on the page, but they took a lot of time and were really meticulous about actually investigating actual cultures. And from the costumes, the traditions, the elders, they interwove elements of actual human cultures into what is a fantastic story. So I think that one of the reasons the movie was able to, take off was that it combined elements of reality and elements of something that people would like to see one day.
Yeah, right.
So I thought it was interesting that I live in Oakland, or I live in Emeryville, California, which is a tiny little 2-mile town that's right in between Oakland and Berkeley. But for the greater city, I basically live in Oakland. And the director, Ryan Coogler, is from Oakland. And when, of course, the Hollywood premieres and the worldwide premieres with all the stars were other places like Paris and LA. But when the movie actually opened nationwide, Ryan Coogler came back to San Francisco, but he specifically actually introduced the movie and spoke to the crowd in San Francisco and in Oakland. And there's a theater here called the Grand Lake Theater, which is one of the older theaters. And when Ryan Coogler surprised the crowd and said, "Hey, what's up, Oakland?" Of course, everybody went crazy.
That's great.
But he actually said that he saw Boys in the Hood with his father in that same movie theater when he was 6 years old. And he talked about crying. Of course, Boys in the Hood, most people know the end of the story. Morris Chestnut is shot down. So he remembers his father taking him to Boys in the Hood, seeing that movie in Oakland Theater. Of course, he also made Fruitvale Station, which was about Oscar Grant being killed by BART police in Oakland, which is also his hometown. And that's Michael B. Jordan, of course, was in that movie before he went on to make Creed and went on to make Black Panther. So I thought that just the fact that the director had tied in even his own experience, which you see Oakland in the movie portrayed at the beginning and the end.
Right.
I thought that obviously that was, you could feel that whole energy throughout the whole making of the film, right?
Yeah, and so you're drawing a distinction between some of those earlier ones, which were more trying to raise awareness about the reality of how people are living in Oakland, for example, as opposed to this movie, which is more, is it Afrofuturistic? Is that the term for where this is coming from?
Afrofuturism is the broad term, and I think that, in the movie, at the beginning and the end, and a little bit in the middle, where, there's that, you're in Oakland, I believe it's East Oakland, and, they're in the housing projects, and you definitely see a flash of the reality of being black in America. And it's not that being black in America is always bad, but there is, a reality that things aren't the way they should be. and that they aren't the way they should be, and racism has a big part to play. But also they talk about colonialism is introduced into the narrative.
Yeah, I
don't look at Black Panther as being an African American movie. It's a movie about really being black, right? Because even the main conflict in the movie is, hey, we're in this place, Wakanda, which is technologically advanced. It's in Africa. But all throughout the movie, there's this identity issue, which is, should, as Wakandans, should we go back and should we lift other people up around the world?
Right.
Should we protect ourselves? How to do that. And each character has their own answer. Killmonger has his own answer. T'Challa has his own answer. Lupita's character has her own answer, right? The general of the army has her own answer.
Right.
Her husband has his own answer. There isn't one answer that's given in the movie, which is, I think, why people reacted strongly to it.
Uh-huh.
They're not being instructed that, hey, this I am the prophet and this is the way. It's more about, let's, for lack of a better term, have a conversation about the way forward.
Yes, I remember my wife, Erin, reflecting afterwards what we were talking about the movie, and the thing that she liked most about it was that it was complicated. It was a complex story, unlike most of these comic book themed movies, which usually have the good guy and the bad guy. Is there a hero or a villain in the movie, in your opinion?
And that is a debate that I haven't even decided on.
Uh-huh.
I can tell you that in conversations, some people don't feel that Killmonger was a villain.
Uh-huh.
They don't think he was necessarily the nicest guy.
Right.
But they don't feel that what he was fighting for was completely selfish. They don't feel that what he was fighting for was completely pointless.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as if he was trying to get a nuclear bomb for the sole purpose of subjugating every nation in the world, like many James Bond films, right?
Right.
He had this sense of inequity, of injustice, and he felt that violence and arms could affect justice,
mm-hmm.
which is interesting because that's a very American ideal. And it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about Donald Trump or President Obama or Bill Clinton. The idea that we often hear this phrase, peace through strength.
Right.
There's a very American idea that you need guns to be free.
Uh-huh.
Certainly we're having a wide gun debate in this country that no one can ignore, right?
Right.
And it's not, although folks are very heavily in favor of restrictions, there's not a debate about whether to have guns or not guns. I mean, it's a foregone conclusion that guns are an American ideal, and that is directly connected to the American idea of freedom. Killmonger represents really the American in the story. And that's an interesting because oftentimes black people aren't portrayed as portraying the American ideal.
Uh-huh.
But if you were to find certainly T'Challa is not an American in the way that he carries himself.
Right.
And so the character that most represents the Americans are the guys who come from America, who literally grew up here with our ideals, and they say, hey, Wakanda, this isn't the way. We've got to bring in, if you want freedom, if you want justice, you've got to enforce that upon the world. It won't happen by itself. And you'd be hard pressed to find in our foreign policy that that's not the way that we behave.
That's really fascinating, and it makes me think I don't know how to express this. This is just a thought off the top of my head. But I know that I've read some academic work where it talks about how, throughout the history of having Africans here in this country, there's, been an evolving struggle about the degree to which America is going to include African Americans as part of the culture, as opposed to just continuing to treat them like they're outsiders. And so that balance in the movie between whether the Africans are going to be inclusive of other people, or whether the American side is going to be exclusive, or that's a dynamic of the film I hadn't really thought about.
Well, there's two different sides. So there's many different sides actually. The Black Panther, the starting point in the movie is Wakanda.
Uh-huh.
That is the reference point. And it is the West, or the Americans, that are the outsiders.
Right.
You typically have a conversation about America, racism, and black people. America is the starting point.
Huh. Right.
And in my view, Americans are Black Americans are absolutely intrinsic to America. In fact, America simply would not exist without Americans.
Yeah.
Economically, America would be Mexico without Black Americans. Militarily, if you study American history and our wars, many of our wars we wouldn't have won without Black American soldiers. Culturally, you'd be hard-pressed to define any sense of modern American culture without black people, right? Whether it be music, whether it be language, whether it be style, whether it be attitude, right?
Right.
So it's not a question of will blacks will be included. The question is under what terms.
Okay.
So we were written into the Constitution as 3/5 of a human being. And to be honest, if Black Americans could get 3/5 the status of white Americans, that would actually be an improvement. Because economically, person to person, like, it's not really 3/5. It's closer to like 1/10 in terms of
wealth,
actual wealth, right? So if we had 3/5 of the wealth of white Americans as Black Americans, that would be like quadrupling our wealth by maybe even more, maybe quintupling our wealth overnight. So that would be an improvement. If you looked at any metric, whether it be, healthcare outcomes, just access to the privileges that are here in America. Certainly we have access to privileges, but if you compare them with the average access of the average white American, it's not 3/5.
Right.
So it's really the terms, and often that's a debate that comes up in the movie, because Wakandans say, hey, if we open up to the world, we're in a very privileged position. We may not be in a privileged position if we open up to the world. They may come try to take our resources.
Right.
We may be in a weakened position. Do we weaken ourselves? And then Killmonger raises the issue of, but I am a child of Wakanda, right? So, and Angela Bassett's character recognizes to T'Challa that at some point, he is, as much as we don't like it, he's still part of us. How do we deal with that, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So let me shift. We've got like 10 minutes left. And there was something that you talked about when we were speaking before the show that really struck me. You were talking about the impact of seeing this movie and the way the characters and the actors are being portrayed from the standpoint of, let's say, a hypothetical 7 or 8-year-old African American boy and a 7 or 8-year-old Caucasian boy, and we can throw some girls in there too, just to be, gender fair. But just in terms of white and black children seeing this movie, you felt like it was a really powerful visual for them. So what do you think about that? People who haven't seen the movie, should they take their children to see it?
Absolutely. And there have been so many tweets. I almost feel like it's impossible to have an original thought on that topic because I've seen so many comments that are articulate, there have been people who were trying to mock the movie, saying, "Ha ha, Wakanda isn't real." And I saw responses that neither is Hogwarts or Narnia, right? And it's interesting that for some people, for academics and nerds and people who pride themselves on digging out facts, maybe, the Stephen Hawkings, rest in peace of the world, maybe their worldview is informed by scientific or highly verified historical knowledge. Mm-hmm. But let's be honest, for most people of any background, their view of the world is based upon stories that they've been told.
Right.
And there's some truth in the stories, but there's also some sizzle in the story. There's some sizzle in the American founder story. There's some sizzle in, Paul Revere and Paul Bunyan and George Washington and Abe Lincoln and all that stuff, right? And there's truth in it too. And so this movie is something that brings, in a very positive way, a lot of sizzle to the story of being black, the story of what being black could possibly be. It's interesting that in certain contexts, people have no problem talking about how black people have pseudo superpowers. I mean, I can think of Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Serena Williams, Tiger Woods, Michael Jackson, Prince. In a certain context, for 20 years, you can hear people of all backgrounds talk about how black people are almost superhuman, right? I mean, probably if you follow sports, you can't go a day without hearing about how LeBron James is simply the greatest athlete ever to play basketball, right? But then in other contexts, it seems hard for people to even recognize the basic humanity of black people. You look at the response to the Parkland shooters, and I remember black kids out in the street protesting Black Lives Matter, stopping traffic, writing congressmen, doing everything that the Parkland kids had done and doing it to a much higher level. And I don't recall anyone supporting them. I don't recall a single college saying that they would not punish Black Lives Matter students for protesting, that they would consider that, a positive in their college applications. Whereas for all of the kids, the white kids in the Parkland shooting, it was like a national movement that they should not be punished for speaking their mind, and they should be celebrated, and they should be on every show. And celebrities instantly gave them money. I don't remember many celebrities giving the same amount of money as quickly to Black Lives Matter. So that is, an interesting dichotomy. So I do think that going in and seeing this movie does have an effect on the black kid and on the white kid, male or female, probably even more so on women and little girls. Because I do think you do see a lot of black males portrayed as superhuman. Maybe only in sports and music, but you do see it.
Yeah.
There's a worship of the Tupacs Serena Williams might be the only black woman that gets praised like that. Yes, people like Oprah, but they consider her more of a person that they like as opposed to being superhuman. Serena might be the only person that gets that level of praise, that no matter what she does, people just praise her for it, which I think is awesome. But it's certainly not commonplace. And I think to walk into a movie and not just see Lupita's character, but see a variety of women, and that are dark-skinned women, and that are strong, and that are intelligent, and just to see that level of superhuman aspect given to them, that is not something that you see.
Yeah, and they are allowed to have their own opinions and to, it seems like sometimes the men want the women to do something and they're asked whether they're willing to do it as opposed to being told that they have to or something like that.
Yes, they have their own agency. Again, I do not want to speak for women, but certainly you can clearly see that just because a woman is married to a man, that she does not necessarily go along with his politics to the point of being willing to give up her life to go against her husband's politics. Right?
Yep.
So I don't want to speak for women, but I do think that you cannot miss that message.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be totally in your own world to miss that. And that's strong. Like to me, that's strong to women and that's strong to men. Like that's a strong message right there. The tension between T'Challa and Lupita's character, I mean, that is kind of yes, there's that flirting thing where he gets, he sees her and she's beautiful and he kind of loses his bearings for a little bit. That's not really so strong. But when they start to talk about their politics and their ideas and how to advance, there's a give and take. And you even see at the end of the movie that T'Challa is willing to change his politics in order to meet the requirements of the queen. Right. And that's pretty powerful because he says, hey, this is the woman I want to be with, but I have to do more than just be the king to be with her. I'm actually going to have to modernize my politics, or else she's not going to be a part of my life, and I'm going to have to make sure that she can still do the work that she wants to do, and I'm going to have to support her, even though I'm the king. And so that I think that is significant.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. So let me just end on, we only have a couple minutes, and I know that we could talk for much longer than this, but I have my time constraints. And so the thought that I want to end on, if you could comment on it briefly, has to do with the idea of hope. So whether or not the movie represents that something has changed, or whether it points in the direction of things in the midst of changing when it comes to race relations in the country or the status of African Americans in the country. Are you hopeful for the future?
Well, let's put it this way. I am hopeful for the future like any other human being. However, I do not look to racial progress or regress in order to find hope. That is the charge, the limitation of my ambition as a human being is limited only to whatever I can believe that I can achieve. My family can achieve, what I believe my child can achieve. And there's no relationship between that and what the society I live in believes that I can achieve.
Okay, great.
And I would say what the movie shows is something that is not shown about African American culture, in that African Americans have always believed, at least some of us, that we can do far beyond what we've been told we can do. And I think while some people will say, it's like, I watched a motivational speaker, and he asked the crowd about Venus and Serena, and them when they were ranked number 1 and number 2. And a reporter had asked Serena, "Why did you ever imagine that you would be number 1 and number 2 with your sister?" And she said, and he said, "Do you know what she said?" And, no one could answer the question. And the answer to the question was, Serena replied, "Yeah, our father told us we would be."
Huh.
And I think something that for African Americans, if I were to go by what I read in the newspaper, I mean, I would be hopeless. So a lot of times the goals that we set and the way we look at ourselves, it's not even what's on social media. It's not what's on the movie. It's literally like, okay, what do I think I can be? Even if I'm the first black golfer, I'm going to be better than Jack Nicklaus, which is a ridiculous statement, right? Like, it's ridiculous for Richard Williams to look at his 2 little girls in Compton and say, you guys are going to be the best tennis players ever to play. I mean, that just there's just no reasonable case for that. Yet, after the 2 of them have won, 33 majors? I mean, if you'd have told them, hey, there's 2 girls in Compton, they're going to win 33 Grand Slams just in singles. And then, you're not even going to be able to count the doubles and other titles because they'll win so many that you just no one will even count them. People would say that's crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And I think for Black Panther, it put on the screen something that our parents have always given us, but it was pretty amazing to see it on the screen.
Yeah. That's great. That's almost like a sermon there, Richard. I appreciate that.
I didn't come up with it. It was passed on to me, so I'm not going to take credit for what was taught to me.
Okay. Well, you can at least take credit for having said it the way you said it. And I often have to end these interviews with some kind of summary that's inspirational or whatever, but I think you just did that for me. So I'm really appreciative that you give me your time, and I hope the people out there who are listening gather some inspiration of their own. And if you haven't seen the movie, you really need to see it. It's a game changer, in my opinion. Thanks for being here, Richard. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody. Talk to you next week.
Living in a city, when you're in it, watch the people walk by. And if you listen real close, you can hear them talk about their lives. And some hate it, some love it, some are felt, some are just tired. These are the people in the neighborhood, they just trying to make it out right. See, she never wanna be a new IPMNation.com